And welcome into the roundtable. Bill Priestley here with you. We just heard from Mark Solomon talking about the Teamsters and UPS, and we're going to switch gears to another Teamsters story, Yellow, in terms of the not necessarily parachute or safety net that they got this past week, but perhaps at least a stay of what could possibly happen in the very near future. Joining us to talk about what could possibly happen and what is happening, John Kingston joins us, our editor-at-large from Carle Place, New York, and also Matthew Leffler, the armchair attorney, joining us from Chicago, Illinois. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us here for this particular segment. And John, you got drew the short straw, if you will, for writing this story, being Todd Maiden is on vacation this week. But what can you tell us about the deal that Yellow is getting in terms of kind of staving off its creditors, at least for a little bit, to stay alive?
Yeah, well, you said stay of. I think the term is stay of execution. I
wasn't going to go there. Yeah, I wasn't going to go there, but you can.
They reached an agreement with two groups of creditors. One is the government. The other is a group of lenders that I read this elsewhere. There's Apollo Management. I'm not really sure about that. But anyway, that provides that two covenants, well, really a covenant that was to be activated or had to be in compliance with by June 30th. And then again, September 30th would be waived. That compliance requires a certain EBITDA to be met. And so that's not going to be a test. If a covenant isn't met in a debt agreement, then it can start the process by a foreclosure or bankruptcy or whatever. So that's not a factor. But it didn't put any more money into Yellow's pockets. It didn't settle anything with the Teamsters. Maybe it gave them more time to talk to the Teamsters before any kind of bankruptcy filing. So in that sense, time is good. But it's I know that there were people who were figuring, well, the end might come this week or next week. I think with this deal, that's probably not likely. I'm not going to say that the end is inevitable, but certainly it seems to be headed that way. The one thing that was in there was that there's a requirement that the company keeps liquidity of $35 million. They said in the filing with the SEC, they said that as of the end of June, their liquidity was $100 million. And then, as Anand Malhotra pointed out in a note that he fired off after the deal was announced, their liquidity was like close to $170 million at the end of March. So, you can see the trend there. The liquidity dropped 60 to 70 million in one quarter. And if they're, let's say, at 100 now, you can see where that's headed.
So, Matt Leffler, you're joining us basically because I can't think of a scenario where the trucking company is going to spend more time in a courtroom than perhaps Yellow is over the course of who knows how long here in the near future. But looking at what they've got right now, obviously, before this, just about a month ago or so, they filed a lawsuit against the Teamsters to try and earn some money back there as well. They've got obviously this agreement now to deal with. They've got much more on their hands. What are you looking at in terms of their perspective from a legal perspective in terms of what they've got to do to not just, obviously get through this particular period, but maybe even just get back to next year when they get a chance to renegotiate with the Teamsters in that new agreement?
A cat with 9 lives. Yellow is a company that we have known about in this industry for decades. They were a fundamental part of our supply chain. Suing the Teamsters was about trying to find a way to make Yellow profitable again, to streamline the businesses. They made the acquisition of Roadway, and yet you still see Roadway trailers out there. So they have over $1 billion that's going to be due next year, $1 billion. And in this economy, in this market, there is not a lot of strength in the union motor carriers. There's only a handful of them left. If you go back to the old days in 1980, 60% of truck drivers were unionized. Fast forward to today, it's a fraction of that. Whether Yellow is able to stay alive is something that we are going to make a decision as a country. We own 30% of that business after we gave them $700 million last year during the COVID pandemic. So the question about what happens with COVID, I don't know.
John, have you ever seen a company in this kind of a straits survive?
In this kind of straits, I'm trying to think. Yeah, probably have. Looking back now, I was writing about steel in the early 80s, and there were companies that always looked like they were about to go under that survived. But in some cases, it didn't really work out in the long run. I always think of Weirton Steel, which was a tin plate manufacturer, and they went to an ESOP, and they survived, but I think they eventually went Chapter 11. I'm not sure what their current state is. So, what happens is that it becomes a death spiral. Nobody wants to book freight with Yellow because now this is a theory. Nobody wants to book freight with Yellow because they might just close up one day, kind of like the way Celadon did. Now, they said in their statement that they released yesterday in conjunction with this that their freight volumes are holding up. We don't know that. I mean, their volumes were way down in their June interim report, but everybody's volumes were way down. Mm-hmm. This would be tough when you start to lose the confidence. And I saw an analyst who put together some numbers the other day talking about capacity in the LTL market, which looks to be fairly significant. Fair amount of excess capacity, and the idea that Yellow could go and there's actually capacity in the LTL space that could suck it up.
Matt, not necessarily looking for your legal advice and asking this particular question, but if you're Yellow at this particular point and looking at that suit that they filed against the Teamsters to try and get some money back, to possibly get some liquidity back there as well, do you continue with that, or do you try and fight the course and not try to spend so much money, obviously, on what would have been a very expensive lawsuit?
For Yellow right now, everything is bet the farm litigation, the type of litigation that will keep you alive. And so they are not just throwing the kitchen sink. They're throwing the HVAC system, the basement, the houses, the bedrooms, every single thing they can, because this is an existential crisis. And they faced existential crises before, but they've always been able to survive, been able to be bailed out. The union takes concessions, takes ownership positions in the company, but that's just not looking like it's going to happen. And in this environment, as John mentioned, there is capacity in the LTL business. The folks like OD or Sire or anybody else in that market would be very eager to take a piece of that pie. Even if the freight's not super valuable, there is the ability to take it on. So the old days where Yellow was something that couldn't go away, it's looking a lot more like Consolidated Freight, which is a great company, but at the end of the day, they could not make it in this non-union environment. And that is what they're facing. People want things cheaper. To have union drivers or union mechanics or union dock workers, it adds a level of complexity and expense. And if you cannot guarantee the freight being delivered on time, undamaged, safely, you're going to lose the customer. And if you lose the customer, it doesn't matter how many bailouts you get. You're not going to come back from that.
John,
yeah, the other thing,
go ahead.
Let me just mention, anytime a company's about to go under, they talk about jobs at risk. Let's face it, these drivers, their lives might be upended. They maybe, they live near a terminal that they operate out of, but all these people can find jobs. So that's not really a significant factor here.
John, as you see this situation, and as you got a chance to, of course, cover that announcement that came out yesterday, what is, as you see it, the first really kind of big benchmark or the first big thing that they've got to accomplish in order to stay solvent?
Well, these benchmarks that are involving like weekly reports, and there's going to be an advisor, an organizational advisor that's going to be put inside Yellow's offices, not literally, but Yellow's offices to monitor it. So if they don't meet some of these benchmarks that were in the deal, they're going to have some trouble here. So they're going to have to. The management of that company is increasingly not going to be in charge. It's going to be this organizational advisor backed by the lenders. And they're going to have to be showing progress in order for them to, hold off on. Of course, the covenant now is gone for September. They decide to waive that, but you still got by the end of the year that covenant would have to be met, as well as as well as what Matt said, the big payments next year. So they on the one hand they have to fix the company. On the other hand, they're not totally in control now because of the reporting requirements under this deal and the installation of this organizational advisor.
Matt, when you look at down the road here, obviously you just mentioned they've got big bills to pay coming up in the next year and beyond if they're still here. What do you look at in terms of how do they progress from here from a legal perspective? Again, you have to say it's all kind of bet the farm litigation at this particular point. But what's the big? Maybe there's the one major thing, the first thing they've got to be concerned about as they start to move forward, and maybe they miss one of these reports or something like that. Anything that they can do to kind of stem the tide if possible?
It's all about being like liquidity. It's about having access to capital. So like having money available to do the different things they want to do. The challenge for them is that they're going to run into a liquidity problem as time goes on. This litigation that's going out there, it's expensive, but it's not hundreds of millions, of maybe a couple, the hundreds of thousands, maybe a couple $1 million to litigate something. That's not going to kill your business. But the story of what's happening with Yellow is the same story we're seeing with FedEx, trying to reshape their own network to make it more useful for their customers. And you see that they have challenges, but they're not the same challenges you see with Yellow. Yellow has different stakeholders, like these union operatives. And so they can put a kibosh, they can slow down the process. And so you're trying to stay alive and profitable as a business. And EBITDA, like earnings before interest, taxation, depreciation, amortization, it's assuming a level of profitability. And that's just not something that's in the calculus for something like Yellow. They've had moments where they can be somewhat profitable, but in this environment, in this type of freight market, it is going to be very challenging to run any trucking company, let alone one that has been on the cusp of death for a decade or longer.
Well,
I wanted to
go ahead, John.
Real quick, in the story I wrote yesterday, I actually sat down to begin writing a story about S&P lowering its debt rating on Yellow, which follows on the heels of Moody's doing the same.
Right.
The fact is, it's kind of interesting. The new S&P rating is a bad rating. It's CCC minus, but there are several steps below it. And that doesn't mean anything. I mean, companies have been B minus, and then they suddenly go Chapter 11. So having CCC minus and having steps below you doesn't protect you against anything. But I mean, my point here is that for whatever reason, S&P, maybe out of an abundance of caution, as they say, or whatever, has not yet given this company the lowest rating prior to a default rating. So they must see something that suggests that they can pull out of this.
Well, we'll have to see what that is, of course. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us. Obviously, this will be a very intriguing story in the weeks and months to come.
Thank you.